Okay, welcome. Thank you for joining us once again for the Deer Talk Now podcast. I am Dan Schmidt. This is Deer and Deer Hunting's weekly podcast. And before we get into today's program, I want to urge you, please like, subscribe, costs you nothing, no matter where you're listening to this or watching this. This is one of the unique podcasts that we do audio, so you could be listening to it on Apple or Amazon or wherever you're downloading your podcasts, or you could be watching the video version mostly on our social media pages, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and we have them all archived right there at deeranddeerhunting.com. Just click on the Deer Talk Now link, and it's going to show you all the programs. We've had a lot of great topics. We're going to keep this a timely topic today, and we're going to talk a little bit about turkey hunting. As you know, we have Turkey and Turkey Hunting magazine along with Deer and Deer Hunting, and 'tis the season, right? We have JJ Reich with us. JJ is with Federal Ammunition. He has been there for many years, good friend of mine, and we call him the ammo daddy in the industry because when we have questions on ammo, JJ is the guy to answer. JJ, thanks for joining us today for Deer Talk Now.
Thanks for having me. This is fun.
You know, we've talked a lot, JJ, in the past, and you've actually helped us with understanding. Actually, one of the greatest articles was wading through the noise in the turkey hunting ammo aisle. And things have really changed over the years, haven't they?
Oh, yeah. Definitely.
So when we first talk about, my experience, your experience, anybody's experience with turkey hunting, it started with lead shot. And one of the examples I'd like to give to start this off was when I was a kid, and I know, JJ, when you were a kid too, big baseball fan. And I collected baseball cards like crazy. And back then, I'd pedal my bike down to the grocery store with my $2 and change, and I'd buy Topps baseball cards. And I loved them, and I knew every single one. Paul Molitor, Robin Yount, Don Money, Sal Bando. And I saved them all, and I put some of them in the spokes of my bicycle wheels, as we all did. But then all of a sudden it changed, and all of a sudden now you had Fleer and Donruss and all these special cards and silver foil cards, and it's like, okay, I give up. That's kind of like what it is with ammo. We started off back then, you had steel loads. What are you going to shoot, 4s, 5s, or 6s? That's it. That's basically was the beginning and the end of this discussion. So let's talk about lead. Give me the history of lead shot specifically for turkey hunting and how people had to navigate back then.
All right. Well, it is a great time to talk about history because Federal is celebrating their 100th anniversary. We're actually turning 100 on April 27th of this year. And so we have been working for a long time just digging through our history and figuring out some pretty cool materials and old advertisements and all this for our 100th anniversary. And so turkey ammo is one of the things that I specifically looked at because I have such a big interest in it. But I saw it was a price list from 1926, and it was talking about turkey loads or loads that you are recommended for turkeys. And back then it was a lead load, it was a paper hull, and it was just a standard. Actually, they recommended number 2s to number 4s, which I think is a pretty big shot, especially number 2. So I'm thinking maybe they did more body shots back then than the head shots. But then it was basically a lead load in a paper hull all the way up through the 50s. And it really didn't start changing until the 60s when the plastic hull shot shell came about. And plastic hulls obviously were a lot more water resistant than paper hull shotgun loads. And so waterfowl hunters and turkey hunters definitely adapted them, and that really grew in popularity. And so, yeah, I mean, did you ever hunt with paper hull?
No, actually, not when I was young. I have shot some just out of nostalgia that my dad had, but I've never shot with paper hulls. One thing that I thought was interesting, wasn't Federal the first one? Didn't they color code when they came along with plastic hulls?
Yeah, so they actually started with the plastic hulls in, I think, 65, and then the color coding didn't start till about 68. And so, and that kind of correlated with a lot of the hunter safety courses and a lot of hunter safety initiatives starting back then. But there was always a safety issue with the 12-20 burst, they called it, where someone would accidentally stick a 20 gauge shell into a 12 gauge, it gets stuck, and then there could be, some, a stuck shell in your barrel, and then you've got problems with it bursting or breaking the barrel, exploding the barrel. And so Federal was the first company to bring out color coding saying what color was each gauge, and they actually registered that with SAMI, or the organization that regulates the hunting industry for guns and ammo. And so that actually became the standard of the industry. And the colors, right, Dan?
I should say that, but I don't. Yellow would be 20 gauge, right?
Well, that's the most important, yeah, so you got it. But what's 28 gauge?
No clue. No, I've never even shot a 28 gauge, so I have no clue.
Well, purple is the biggest one for 16 gauge. People really recognize that. And brown is 10 gauge, and it goes from that.
Well, I know I had green 12 gauges, and I had red 12 gauges, but I think 20 gauge, I just automatically thought of yellow as that's the 20 gauge load. One thing I remember about back then, and now I'm jumping ahead of myself here a little bit, but with lead shot, when I was a kid, the thing that I always thought about was guys that went turkey hunting, which it wasn't many because we didn't really have turkey seasons here probably until I was a teenager. But I remember guys would shoot that old 10 gauge bolt action Marlin, I think it was a Super Goose shotgun. I think it weighed like 10.5 pounds. It had a 36-inch barrel. And I just remember being a kid, like, you need a cannon to shoot these turkeys. And that's one thing I do remember about growing up with turkey hunting. And with as far as the shot, I was kind of oblivious. I didn't even know. I didn't even know what they were shooting back then. But it seemed to me like it was like taking down a dinosaur to kill a turkey.
Yeah, well, I think that goes back to pellet count and people just wanting as many pellets as they can downrange to hit that turkey. Typically when you're turkey hunting, you get one shot. If you're lucky, maybe a follow-up shot. But so that one shot really counts. So it really matters what you're throwing downrange and how much of it. So 10 gauge really became popular to try to get more your success rate up with more pellets downrange, and that makes sense.
So that pretty much was. I mean, was there any innovation? Let's just say from 1965 all the way through. I mean, for 30 years, it was basically a couple tweaks here and there, but nothing really major, right?
No, I mean, I think that it was really stagnant between the 1920s all the way up to the 60s. And then the 60s, you started getting some things happening. It really boils down to the components of a shot shell, right? So if you're looking at a shot shell load, it's what is the shot type, correct? And then what is the wad? And then how much shot is in there? And then also how much powder is in there to help your velocity and all that. And then it goes into more superficial things like, what the hull is made of and what primer and things you're using. But it really boils down to, especially for turkey hunting, the payload and then the velocity. And so the payload actually did start increasing when they started coming up with magnum loads. So a shot shell or a game load had a certain amount of, or a certain weight of lead shot, and then basically what changed the game was creating magnum loads, which meant more weight or more pellet count in the shot shell. And I believe that was probably in the 60s when they started magnum loads.
Was that?
And now you wouldn't even.
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
Nope. Go ahead.
Oh, I said now you wouldn't even think about turkey hunting without a magnum load.
Right.
Especially if you're using lead shot.
So let's talk about, do you know what those pellet counts were, like from the early loads to the new quote unquote magnum loads?
I'd have to look it up, but typically, some of the standard field loads were maybe 1 1/8 ounce, and now you're looking at 1 3/4 ounce.
Okay.
And then the Magnum loads, there was a 2 3/4 inch load, and they made that Magnum by pumping in a little bit more weight in the payload. But then they jumped to 3 inch shells, and that was basically, your 3 inch Magnum that came out. And then to kind of counteract the whole 10 gauge scenario, then the 3.5 inch loads came out.
Sure.
And did you hunt with 3.5 inch loads?
Yeah, that's what actually my very first dedicated turkey gun. I shot the 3.5 inch loads because I need everything I can get. And then originally I shot the 3.5 inch sixes, but then after I kind of played around with the fives, I settled on the fives for quite a few years. For me, it's almost like bow hunting. Whatever broadhead and arrow you have, once you get it, you kind of keep it. And that's what I did for years. Is I just said, nope, it's going to be the 3.5 inch fives, and I stayed with that for the longest time.
Yeah, so if you want to put some dates to it, in 1954, Federal Ammunition introduced its first 2 3/4 inch Magnum load.
Okay.
So that was a heavier payload. And then in 1957, that's when the 3 inch Super Magnums came out.
Okay.
So I would definitely say that turkey hunters gravitated towards that for sure. So the late 50s, all the way through the 60s, into the 70s, was all the 3 inch. And then in 1965, we introduced the new plastic hull, and that helped the whole water resistant thing. And then in 1975, we started promoting more. We had game guides that kind of tell you what shot shells
I remember those,
were used
yeah.
for what game. And so we still recommended BBs, 2s, 4s, 5s, and 6s for wild turkeys. But what I noticed is if they're recommending 6s for wild turkeys, I'm assuming back then in the mid-70s, people were taking more headshots than they were body shots than the early days.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you're shooting BB, you were probably just like definitely body shooting those things. I mean, unless you got lucky and got one in the head. I mean, that'd be pretty difficult.
Right. There's not too many pellet count in a BB load. And then in 1988, the 3.5 inch Magnum load was introduced.
Oh,
and
wow.
That was in conjunction with Mossberg.
Yep.
And that was really to compete the whole 10 gauge, still giving you a ton of payload and a ton of pellet count, but in a different configuration. But I mean, I don't think I'd shoot 3.5 inch loads anymore. I mean, it's not really necessary.
It really kills your shoulder, especially when you're sitting there trying to sight in a gun. And that's one thing I want to get to later. But so that's actually interesting. I did not know that 3.5 didn't even come out till 88, because it was only a couple of years after that is when I really started getting into turkey hunting, was in the 90s. So we did all that. I know that there was a couple iterations after that, but now we get to what, maybe 25 years ago when tungsten came on the scene?
Yeah, I mean, turkey loads really didn't start becoming something special until like the 1990s and the 2000s, when we really started changing. Again, let's go back to the components. You've got lead loads, copper-plated lead came out. But then in the late 90s, then the whole tungsten thing came out, and that really changed the game.
So tell all the listeners about that, because I know there's a lot of turkey hunters out there, even myself included. When you get to this technology, some of it just, hey, if it goes boom and I can kill turkey with it, awesome. But what was the whole premise behind using tungsten? What we do know, tungsten, it's a naturally occurring metal that they dig out of the ground, and I actually had to look it up that 80% of it comes from China. I know that. But what is the purpose of tungsten? What does it do, and how did it help make turkey hunting loads specifically jump from something that had been around for, I don't know, what, 80 years until something brand new?
Yeah, well, tungsten, you really need to understand that tungsten isn't just a metal alloy. So it's a tungsten iron alloy. They mix in different metals into it too, but basically what an alloy is it's a mix of different metals to become its own metal. And tungsten, what we use is more of an alloy than anything else. So you can change that recipe, right, to be what you want it to be. Now, really, in 1998, when it came out, it was more for a new non-toxic shot. So, steel, obviously, in the early 1990s, the federal government changed all the waterfall laws so that you had to shoot steel and you couldn't put, lead in the waterways. And so, steel always had kind of a reputation of being a little weaker than what hunters wanted, and so ammo manufacturers and people loading shot shells were looking for different shot types in order to get better effective performance than steel, and that's when the whole tungsten thing came out. And so it's denser or a little heavier than what steel would be. So when you have a dense shot or a heavy shot, that allows you to get a smaller pellet, but get that payload or get that payload weight to be what you want it to be in a shot shell.
Which is
Does
very,
that make sense?
yes, absolutely. So, which is very interesting. So, you're basically talking about, and I actually in your article, I know that you bring this out, but when you're looking at now, I know the sizes are different. You can maybe tell people how that works, like number 9. Tungsten shot, 1.75 has, I mean, now if you're looking at a 2-ounce number 6 lead shot shell, I looked it up, 446 pellets as opposed to 630 in a load that's 1.75 9 tungsten. So you're getting not quite twice as many pellets out of a shot shell that's loaded with something that's denser and harder than lead.
Yeah, so really they talk about grams per cubic centimeter. That's the whole science behind it. So I'd have to look up the numbers. I don't have it, but off the top of my head, I think steel is like 7 point something as far as if you had the same size pellet, what it would weigh grams per cubic centimeter. So I think steel is, like I said, 7 point something, and then it jumps up with lead to 9 something, and then you start getting into the tungstens where you can get 12 or 13, or today we have the TSS, or the tungsten super shot, which is 18 grams per cc. So you have a very small pellet that has the same penetration energy and downrange energy going down as a larger pellet that's made of lead or steel.
Right.
And that's how it boils down to. So if you have TSS, then you have a very small pellet that has the same effectiveness and downrange energy than a larger pellet. And because it's so much smaller, you can get more of them in the shot shell, and so your pellet count is sky high.
Your pellet count is sky high, and for turkey hunting, that's everything. You want to get as many pellets in a good pattern when you're shooting at a turkey downrange. How does like a heavyweight TSS compare distance-wise? Does it improve my distance when I'm shooting as opposed to steel or lead?
Yes, because it carries its energy longer, or its penetration energy and its velocity longer downrange. So think about it as throwing a softball or throwing a hard ball. So it's a smaller pellet, and so that's going to basically, you're going to be able to throw it longer because there's less wind resistance against the pellet and gravity and all that stuff, right? So or think about it as stabbing something with a dull knife point or stabbing it with a really small sharp point. You're just going to have more penetration energy and all that. So That's how that works.
It's very similar when we talk about archery too. When we talk about arrows, it's kind of interesting when you talk about that as far as just the kinetic energy and downrange abilities for just for example TSS heavy shot versus steel or lead. The other thing that I found fascinating is this year, this is something brand new that I'm going to be doing. Is I'll be shooting the heavy shot out of a 410 for turkey hunting. And that's something I would have never thought. I mean, I know people have shot turkeys with 410s, but I always thought, oh, man, they got to be close. That's going to be just like a small little, golf ball size pattern coming out of that. But that's really changed the game for those types of guns, hasn't it?
Oh, definitely. I mean, that's been a trend or a rage the last several years. But it again, it boils down to science, right? So if you have a 2 3/4 inch shot shell, 12 gauge, number 5 pellets, and then you go to a 410 bore, but you're using TSS, and it's a number 9 size pellet, then the number of pellets is going to be pretty close, probably within about a dozen or two of pellet count. So again, because you're using a smaller pellet, that little hull doesn't really matter because you're still getting the same amount of pellets or very similar amount of pellets as you would your traditional 2 3/4 inch number 5 lead. And so it's pretty much using a 410 number 9 TSS is like using a 12 gauge number 5 2 3/4.
Yeah,
so it's crazy.
It is crazy, but it's cool because it gives you so many more options when you're out there turkey hunting. Okay, so let's go.
On the flip side, though, I want to say, like, if you took that whole, remember that 3.5 inch cell we were talking about,
right?
If you load that thing with TSS, we have a load that's a combo load between size number 8 and size number 10 in a 3.5 inch shell, and that thing is having an average of 1,006 pellets on payload.
Gracious. That's insane.
It is insane.
That's absolutely insane. What do you get for distances on that?
We, as far as an ammo manufacturer, we're never really going to promote long range shooting.
Thank you.
But people.
Thank you. I was hoping you'd say that.
So we always say 50 plus.
Wow.
So you can take your own guesses on that.
I am glad you answered it that way because we actually had this conversation about crossbow hunting and distances, and the person answering the question basically said if you're shooting at 100 yards at a deer with a crossbow, you shouldn't be out there bow hunting. So it's kind of the same thing with turkey hunting and shotguns. Man. Okay, everybody, we're going to take a quick break. We're going to thank one of our sponsors. Today's episode of Deer Talk Now podcast is brought to you by Scent Killer Gold Laundry Detergent with Power Boost Plus from Wildlife Research Center. Featuring ultra-concentrated odor-fighting power and ultra-premium dirt and stain-removing powder, Scent Killer Gold provides twice as many loads per ounce compared to regular Scent Killer laundry detergent. I use this stuff year-round, not just for hunting season. I have allergies. This stuff is hypoallergenic. It's scent-free. I use it on all my clothes. No, I don't smell like a GQ guy when I go out or anywhere, but Scent Killer Gold laundry detergent really helps me, and it's very economical. You only have to use that little cap. That's it. One little cap of that stuff in an entire extra large load of laundry. Pull your clothes out, smell it. There's not going to be any scent there at all. It's pretty incredible stuff. Take your scent elimination to an extreme level by looking for those gold caps. Wildlife actually owns the copyright on the color of those caps because a lot of other competitors have been trying to rip it off and have their packaging look like Scent Killer Gold. Get some at your local sporting goods dealer or check it out at wildlife.com. So let's talk about, so we go from lead to tungsten, and like my baseball card analogy, now you've got something called, and you've actually had it for quite a few years, third degree. Tell people what that is about and what's the technology and science there.
So it goes back to the simplicity of what's in a shot shell, like we were saying earlier in the conversation. The whole recipe of a shot shell is the hull, the primer, the powder, the wad system, the shot type, and then what the shot is made of. So when you mix around a recipe like that, you could get pretty crazy. So we actually did a stacked load, and that's what we call third degree. And we call it third degree because there's 3 different shot types in that load. So when we load it, we first put in some TSS, about 20%, and that's number 7 TSS, and that's in the bottom part of the stack. And then they stack on number 5 copper-plated lead, and then on top of that, they stack on some number 6 flight stopper lead. Now, flight stopper lead is a specially shaped pellet, and so instead of it being a round pellet, it's round, but it also has a cutting edge around it, so it kind of acts like a frisbee. When you throw a frisbee, it kind of wants to veer right or left, and so when you have that flight stopper pellet coming out of the muzzle, it's going to open up. It's going to go right or left a little bit. So it's going to give you a wider pattern right off the bat. And then, so that's going to be your close range shot. And then you have the number 5 copper-plated lead in the middle. That's going to give you your middle distances. I mean, we've been shooting turkeys with copper-plated lead at 25 or 20 to 30 yards for decades, right? So that's kind of your middle range performance. And then at the end, or the back, is going to be number 7 TSS, and that's going to give you your longer range performance. So this one load is basically giving you all. It's allowing you to get close range shots, medium range shots, and long range shots. Because when you're turkey hunting, you really don't know where that turkey's going to come from, or if it's just going to pop behind a oak or a grove of pine trees and be right in your face. You never really know. So you want to have the advantages of having the ability to kill that turkey from whatever range you have a shot at it. A lot of people using TSS have some complaints about it, that they're missing turkeys up close, because when you have a very tight wad system, and when you have that whole TSS, it's basically going to come out like a slug at 10 yards.
Very small pattern.
Start opening up till yeah. I mean, you're going to get longer range, but it's going to start out very tight, and it's not going to open up until later down range. So a lot of people were missing turkeys close range because they had this long range load in their gun. And you can avoid that by understanding what you're shooting, and either shoot it before it gets too close, or set your decoys a little farther away, or whatever you want to do. But for me, I love this third degree because it just gives you the whole all the options of shooting at whatever range it comes in.
Fascinating stuff. And I would like to know who actually thought of that idea. Or are you guys just sitting around and say, hey, I got an idea. Let's pack.
Well, actually, it was me, actually.
You did. And that's something I should have known, but I did not know to give you credit for that.
Yeah, well, we basically we were sitting around, and so I always say I helped design that load, but what I did was just write my idea down on a napkin, and we were having a happy hour, and I gave it to the engineers and said, you guys should try this, because it's a way for us to really market the whole fact that you can hunt at all range and not just worry about it.
I'm sorry, JJ. How do the different shot sizes, pattern, whatever, how do they stay together? Like, aren't some of them deflecting off of others, or when they're coming out of that shell, or is it just the way they're stacked that it's just kind of like deploying in waves? I mean, over microseconds.
Yeah, it's definitely microseconds, but I mean, I think there's going to be pellets bumping into each other regardless of what type they are. That's just the way it works.
Mm-hmm.
It's a shot shell, so it's just But what really matters is the ultimate pattern at the end,
which is phenomenal.
Yeah. So, so if you're using like third degree, you're going to see a really good pattern at 10 to 15 yards. Like, yes, you would have killed that turkey, and you had some wiggle room as far as there's pellets on the right side of the bird, the left side of the bird, up and down, right? So that's what you're looking for. But you're also going to get an excellent pattern for mid-range, but then you're also going to get a killable pattern at long range. Now, you're not going to walk up to that turkey target at 50 yards and it's going to be, awesome as far as tons of pellets there. But that's just because that's not how this load was designed. Now, when you do walk up on that target, you will see at least 10 pellets in the head and 30 in the 10 pellets in the vitals and 30 in the head and 100 pellets around a 10-inch circle around that turkey. So it's a killable pattern. If you really want to impress your friends or yourself with a long-range pattern at 50 yards, that's when you pull out the 3.5-inch,
right,
number 8s and 10s, and then you'll get all kinds of pellets in the pellet, in all that target at 50 yards. But it really kind of depends on what you want to hunt with. Is
pellet count overrated on paper
In my
targets?
personal opinion, yes. But I don't want to get in trouble. So
I agree with you, because I see that a lot where people just kind of get all worked up, and it's like, oh man, I only had 150 pellets, and I'm like, you only need one, and that's one thing that I did notice when I shot third degree, is that was a learning curve for me, because I shot, I'm like, oh, this pattern sucks. I mean, because I'd shoot it at 40 yards, and like you said, well, there's plenty of pellets in there. But then if I want to shoot a nice, pretty pattern, I shot something else. But that's very interesting. I'm glad you said that. So let's also now talk about a couple things I want to get to yet. One was a thing I've noticed with Federal and other ammo makers. Now you're coming out with custom loads. What are you doing with for turkey hunting specifically on custom turkey rounds?
Yeah, well, it's really simple as far as that goes. It's basically hunters who want to hunt with their 28 gauge, and there just isn't any factory ammo for 28 gauge. But if you want a turkey load, then you can go to the custom shop online at federalpremium.com, and you can order 28 gauge turkey loads. It's just, we're not going to spend all kinds of time and money to make a huge batch of 28 gauge turkey loads when the market isn't really asking for them all over the country. There's plenty of people who want to hunt with them, but it's just not something we'd stock at like a Cabela's or Bass Pro or something like that, because it's a pretty niche load, right? So that's what the custom shop's all about. We also have like a 2 3/4-inch lower recoil load in the custom shop. I believe we have a lower recoil 20 gauge load. So people who are looking for a really low recoil 20 gauge load for youth hunters or whatnot, they can find it there. So it's kind of these loads that you wouldn't be able to find in just a Cabela's, and that's in the online custom shop.
That's very cool, and that's something that everybody should pay attention to, because if you have one of these oddball, gauge guns, or like JJ said, a lower recoil, they can actually make pretty much whatever you want right there in their custom shop. With we're talking all about ammo, we're talking about the components, which I find is fascinating. There's one extra thing I want to ask you about on that, but before that, what about, because this is the thing that I remember most when I first started turkey hunting, was we weren't thinking about ammo because it wasn't there. It wasn't to this point yet, what he just all talked about. We were just trying to saying, oh, should I shoot a 20 or a 12? Should I shoot 3-inch or 3.5? But then the big thing became chokes, aftermarket chokes. And we were running around as like, oh, Kicks has the best chokes, or the Compton choke is the best choke, or, the Mad Max, which is still rusted to my Mossberg, is the best choke. And tell me about that a little bit, JJ. With not only turkey choke advancement, but does it affect anything now if I have a gun that's 20, 25 years old and I want to shoot tungsten through it? Does it make a difference?
Yeah, so when it comes to choke, we always recommend you talk to the choke companies, not the ammo companies, right? But and what I mean by that is that a lot of these chokes were originally created for a traditional wad system. And so if you have a wad that opens up from the front and, allows the shot string to pull from the wad because the wad is opening up from the front, then a choke system is really going to help that, because it's going to allow more control of restriction of what you want that shot string to do right when it leaves the muzzle. And that's what chokes are, right? It's just the common, very simple definition of a choke. But Federal uses a really specialized load, especially in all of our, wad. We use a specialized wad in all of our turkey loads, and that's going to be the Flight Control Flexwatt. Now, the Flight Control Flexwatt is a totally different wad. It opens up from the rear instead of the front. And so think of it as being the brake system on an airplane, where the little flaps on the wings will basically rise up and allow air resistance to kind of stop the plane by pushing on it. Well, that's the thing with the Flight Control Flexwatt, is that there's some wings in the back of that wad that open up from the back, and then the air resistance pushes the wad away from the shot string. And so, because it's not opening up from the front, the pellets aren't scattering right away. They're basically staying together and staying in that shot string longer, because the wad is basically being pulled away from it. So for us, we really say that our wad system acts as the choke. I mean, it really controls that shot string. So you can use just a standard factory full choke, or even a standard turkey choke. All these turkey guns that are specialized turkey guns, they're like Mossberg, they're all coming with factory turkey chokes or extra full turkey chokes. And so our ammo just works great with just the standard factory. Now, if you want to get into a specialized choke system, then a lot of these companies, like Carlson Choke Companies, they're making their chokes adaptable to the whole Flight Control wad, and they're really specializing in that, so that their chokes work well with the wad. So you do need to kind of keep that in mind of what the wad system is on your turkey load when you're picking your choke.
Thank you very much. That was actually my last question, was about the Flexwatt system, because I actually didn't know all of that detail, which you just provided. So what you're telling me is go back to put my factory full choke on my gun and get that rusty old aftermarket choke off of there, and I should be good to go. How did that?
I'd say shoot it with the choke that you have on it and see what it does, and then shoot it with your regular factory choke and see what it does. And
that'll work too.
See what you like it.
How did that idea come about? Was it specifically because of the new shot materials?
What do you mean, the whole wad system?
Yeah, the new wad system.
That came out in 2005. It was just called the Flight Control Wad, and it was an invention from an ammo designer that came to us, I think, at SHOT Show, and said, "Hey, I've got this really cool wad that allows for a longer range shot, because it keeps the shot string tighter for longer before it releases it." So, back in 2005, we did all these testing, and we realized that you could have longer range shots, especially in the waterfall arena, with this new wad system. So we bought it from him and started producing ammo with the Flight Control wad.
That's pretty cool.
Now ported chokes was kind of a problem with it, because it would actually kind of chew up the choke the ports would when it was coming out of the muzzle. So we had to redesign it, and we redesigned it, I believe, in 2018 to be the flight control Flexwatt. So now it works with any choke, no matter if it's ported or non-ported.
Very cool. Fascinating stuff. Well, that's enough for today. I want to urge everybody, there's way more on this. And I should say, JJ, I've already told you this, but to all my friends at Federal, that anniversary is pretty spectacular. That shows one company that has been here in America, and it's here to stay.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun to work on that whole 100-year history thing, and it's going to be all year long. So if you want to talk about it in some other episode, we certainly can.
We're definitely going to do that because we're going to get back to talking about deer and deer ammo for the next one, which I hope you'll join us for.
I'd love to. Thank you.
Awesome. For JJ Reich, I am Dan Schmidt. Once again, please like and subscribe no matter where you're listening or watching this podcast. And for more information on this podcast, go to deeranddeerhunting.com. We will catch you next time.